Pubcast today. We are here with Julia Mossbridge. Hi, Julia.
Hey, hi Lisa. Thanks for having me.
All right. And today we have Desi Robot. Hi, Desi.
Desi stayed up pretty late last night.
Desi had a rough night. That's true. But I'm sure she's.
I am thrilled to be here. It's been great so far.
Well, that's good.
That is good. Yes. And Ben Goertzel will be joining us soon. And he's just see?
I'm telling you, Ben, I think you wait till this starts and then you show up.
Yeah, we're pretty sure now, Ben, that you are sitting in your car looking at the show on your phone, doing stuff until we start, and then you come in. Just admit it.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah, actually, we've got Randall Kona visiting Vashon today. We've been hearing all about the latest in proto mind uploading technology.
Brain upload, yeah.
Oh, very cool. Where is that at now?
Well,
Vashon Island is where Ben is.
No,
I
mean, like, where's the tech at now?
Oh, tell us where Randall's at now. It's incredible. It's always something incredible with him.
I mean, what's interesting now, there's a lot of technologies out there that are able to evidently reconstruct small networks of neurons within brains of various organisms, be it C. elegans or Drosophila, or even in some cases human, right? So you can reconstruct a little bit now. No one's reconstructed a whole organism's brain, but it's amazing you can do that. So actually, a lot of what we were talking about was just how do you measure if you've succeeded or not? Because we don't have a good way to do that now. So we was looking at, like, can you put together like a test system, like say a lattice, a square array of neurons, which are all just snaking out, connecting to each other, like phase synchronizing and long-term potentiating and whatnot, doing their chaotic thing. Given like a two-dimensional lattice of neurons, how many probes do you have to put into it to be able to reconstruct the dynamics of that in a simulation, right? Like presumably, if you watched every neuron, you could just do it with some fancy math, right? But if you have like 10,000 neurons and 5 probes in there, right, then what are you really able to reconstruct? And there's
wait, Ben. Question. Sorry, can I interrupt you for this question?
Anytime.
Yeah.
So the C. elegans nervous system is all mapped out, right? So couldn't you take the C. elegans nervous? I mean, when I say mapped out, I mean like we know what all the cells are. It doesn't mean that we understand all the interactions, right?
Right.
But can't you take sort of what we know so far and look at the behavior? So the canonical interactions with light, or probably light and vibration.
You could do that, and that's an interesting question though, because I could probably make a simulated C. elegans just by training a machine learning model on observed data of C. elegans behavior. But then what happens inside doesn't really resemble what's happening inside the
right
C. elegans, right? And so then by doing that, you wouldn't learn that much about how to simulate human behavior, let alone uploading people. So yeah, you could try to take. I mean, if you simulate the whole body of the C. elegans, as well as the nervous system, you can see whether does your C. elegans do the right sort of stuff in your simulation world. And I guess we don't know how accurate you have to get the internal model to get how accurate for the observed behavior. I actually, I mean that's or you might get close enough that it looks fine to us, but wouldn't feel the same to the C. elegans.
Right, but it's sort of a start, like to have a runoff between the machine learning approach to the behavior with like black box inside. Well, not black box, but like nothing resembling, as you say, what's actually going on in C. elegans. And then the sort of bottom up, quote unquote, version based on the neurons in the body, and then having them train each other. So kind of converging.
Well, kind of like a GANs or something?
No, it
Critiquing
wouldn't be like that, but
no.
It would almost
mean,
be like reinforcement, like reinforcement learning with human feedback, except it's the feedback of the one system is feedbacking on the other with sort of like, well, this should be that. Well, what about, well, the behavior system, which is machine learning, that's going to have better behavior that more resembles the actual animal, can give feedback to the nervous system. You know what I mean? That'd be kind of cool.
It would be cool. I think to me, the interest of working with these model organisms is mostly just to learn how to do the reconstruction, right? So simulating the behavior of a C. elegans or a fruit fly doesn't matter that much. It's more learning how the research question that interests me a little more, although it's all interesting in general, is like, can you really reconstruct the internal dynamics of the brain network from a limited set of probes into it, right? And we don't have
any benchmarks, right, for what we're measuring. I mean, how do we know if it feels like it to it?
Right, we have that problem with humans, right?
Right, because we can't revive one and ask.
Yeah. But I mean, I think if you had just a neural array, I mean, you could ask that question in a number of interesting senses. I mean, you could ask, does the inferred system display the same dynamical behaviors as neural arrays of that type do? You could also ask, does it emulate that exact neural array and its particular?
I feel like that's less interesting too. I think more interesting is this sort of convergence between inside and outside behavior and sort of
depends if you want to create an artificial human or you want to mind upload a specific human.
I think they feed on each other, right?
They're just different problems, right?
They're different problems, but if you learn something about one, it feels like you could learn about the other a little.
Yeah, they're the same character of problem. You probably need more probes into one system to mind upload that individual, whereas to understand the character of the human brain as a dynamical system, you can get away with a smaller number of probes into a larger number of individuals, which is closer to what we have now, right?
Right. But it all sort of depends on whether there's sort of a non-material component to an individual's consciousness, in which case, if your material sort of electrical probes aren't going to grab onto it, report on it, unless
we don't know how that would work.
That's right, because the non-material component could influence the electricity of the
The non-material aspect could influence the neural array for that matter, if it has to do with some weird post-quantum voodoo in the way that the neuron itself operates, and that could be an interesting way to uncover that. Yeah, I mean,
if it doesn't, then there's an issue, but if it does, there's no problem with that kind of probe.
Yeah, and we just don't know, right? I mean,
we don't know.
Something a little more sophisticated than a neural array, but less in the brain, is like a neuroid that's grown in a vat, right?
Yeah,
so then
an organoid, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you could grow neural organoids of various sorts, and there's a lot of weird conceptual and ethical issues there. Like, can you grow a neural organoid that's just experiencing ecstasy in a vat all the time? Another one that's just experiencing pure suffering all the time, right? And
if you do that, like skipping the ethical stuff, if you do that, does that change the nature of the universe? I'm super interested in whether the experiences that an organoid or human or animal are having actually change the nature of the universe. Like if you have more organoids that are feeling unconditional love, does that actually shift the universe? Just that feeling?
I think so.
You can certainly test Sheldrake's morphic resonance hypothesis with a global ensemble of organoids, right?
Yeah,
so like
right.
All right. So what's that? If you're gonna,
Okay, yeah. So
you can't just whip that out and not
Sorry.
explain what you're talking about.
So Rupert Sheldrake, you can look him up, but he's famous for this morphic resonance idea that there's this sort of I think he's going with non-material or non-physical sort of field that it's almost teleological. Like I think he would say that it sort of pulls from the future, but maybe he wouldn't say that. Maybe he doesn't think about it in terms of time travel like I do. But it's like informational substrate or an informational blueprint that helps shape what happens like in development or what happens in learning or what happens in basically any change. What do you think I'm missing on that, Ben? Is that pretty?
I mean, the way I would say it is the core empirical hypothesis he's making is that when some particular pattern has unfolded, when some particular thing has happened a few times in some part of the universe, it becomes more probable to happen other places in the universe. So, for example, he hypothesized that when a certain difficult chemical synthesis has been done 100 times in various chemistry labs, it becomes easier in other chemistry labs because the universe has kind of figured out how to do that thing. So
it's like the 100th monkey thing.
Yeah. So if 100 people have the idea that aliens are supposed to be green with big eyes, then when someone else daydreams about aliens, the thing that will pop into their mind is green with big eyes, because that's already occurred a bunch of times in the universe. So
even if they haven't talked to each other. So it's not on the level of like human communication. It's sort of before that or underneath that.
Yeah, it's a correlation.
There's also some concrete things that could have led to that, right? That's the point too, right? When a bunch of people invent the same device around the same time without talking to each other, for instance,
right?
It's because the things in the world have led to the natural progression of that thing.
Well, that's what you're saying. That's your hypothesis, but that's not his hypothesis.
That's a critique of the morphic resonance hypothesis.
Wait a minute, I'm not critiquing. I'm not saying.
No, I'm not saying that it's bad to critique it.
Things can be true, is what I'm saying. It can be part natural progression and then part absolute connection. And as someone who has done a lot of things with just trying to get people to think about stuff at a time to do a thing that was impossible that ended up being done, I believe in it personally. But if you've never seen it happen, and it's not worth trying to convince people, but I think both things could be true. So it's okay to just progress both ideas. That's what,
Oh, absolutely. And just so you know that is a critique the legitimate critique people have on the morphic resonance hypothesis. And I know that you're not using it that way. And it's important to understand the critiques, because if you're going to test a hypothesis like that, you need to have no other way that information could come from a source and sort of evolve through time to produce the event that you're looking at, right? And so that's how you're going to rule that out. And so when Ben said that you could use organoids to test the morphic resonance hypothesis, he's thinking about ways to reduce sort of prior causes that could cause a particular effect, right, Ben? I think that's why you're thinking.
Yeah, because I mean, the morphic resonance hypothesis, in the sense that Rupert Sheldrake meant it, it's a spooky psychic power-ish sort of thing, which requires some acausal connecting principle, as Jung referred to it in the context of his book Synchronicity, right? So one amusing thing I found is the physicist Lee Smolin proposed something almost identical in the domain of quantum mechanics, which he called the precedence principle. So he proposed the idea that once something has occurred multiple times in the universe, that thing is more likely to occur again. And he used that assumption as one of the assumptions underlying a derivation of the basic rules of quantum mechanics from first principles. Now that
and he also used it to try to explain how time works. Like he says, like using that principle, this is how physical laws actually change. You know, speed of light actually can change over time because of this. I mean, it's kind of because he sees time as fundamental. He sees it as causal. Yeah.
I mean, there's literally hundreds of ways to derive quantum mechanics from basic axioms. So the fact that you can derive quantum mechanics from that doesn't tell you that much. But Smolin seems not too happy that his idea is the same as Sheldrake's morphic resonance, because he's coming from a serious physics perspective, whereas Rupert is sort of positioning himself as fringe science. On the other hand,
well, I think he's been positioned that way because of the culture. Any physicist who talks about that stuff is positioned. Any non-physicist who talks about that stuff is positioned that way. Any physicist who talks about string theory and all this like radical, multidimensional stuff is positioned as like super cool. I mean, we have this bias, right?
Yeah, but
the scientists can talk about far out shit, and it's just like, oh yeah, they're the scientists, so we can't understand it, but they know what they're talking about.
He is a scientist. He just comes from a biology background, right?
Right. There's a ladder of status that people just kind of either consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, biologists are way down, and the physicists and mathematicians are battling over who's at the top. Basically.
I think it shifts. It definitely shifts too, depending on the current. You know what
it shifts? Actually,
like
what it
AI
shifts depending on
programmers are getting all this credit.
Yeah, but us mathematicians have always been at the top. I mean,
it shifts. The empirical results show that it shifts according to how many women get faculty positions in the field. If you have more women, if you have more women with faculty positions in the field, it's bad for the neighborhood. It drops the status of the field. Yeah, it's depressing, but that is.
Well, let's hope to be dropping a lot of status then in the near future.
Let's hope.
Well, all of us humans will be dropping status dramatically in all the fields.
Exactly, because those numbers are only going up.
Right?
That's right. I'm having this experience of seeing all these questions come by, and I feel like we should be addressing them. But
wait a minute. So
address them.
We can. I'm ready.
Awkward.
No,
let me finish clarifying.
Well, just a second. We're going to let Ben finish. We have a question from Desi, and then I have some questions from the audience already picked out.
I see a lot of them.
Okay. Let's finish the organizing.
So, Ben, go ahead, do your thing, and then Desi's going to do her question. Go ahead, Ben.
The crazy hypothesis I was throwing out there was just that, if something like morphic resonance is real, and if it plays a role in what the brain does, and if whatever lets the brain partake in it can be simulated in some neuroid, some neural organoid, some bundle of neurons that you grew in a vat, which may differentiate into different regions and so forth, right? Then perhaps take 10,000 of these from different labs around the world, try to train a few hundred of them to do something, see how long it takes, how hard it is for them to self-organize in a certain way in response to the stimuli that you gave them. Then see if indeed the neuroids elsewhere in the world can self-organize in response to that stimulus faster. And converge their attractor faster, right? And that would be what Rupert Sheldrake would hypothesize would happen. If it worked, then you have something quite interesting, because then you can put various probes into these neuroids and try to see, like, is there some macroscopic quantum voodoo at some part of the dendritic connections or something, like what is it physiologically inside, or in physics sense, inside the neurons that's correlated with this morphic resonance thing, right? Because and we don't know.
Well, so you could do the same thing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there could be aspects to this that are just too trickstery and hard to pin down,
right,
for us to fully address by the empirical methodology. But it may not all be that way, right? I mean, there may be some aspects you can address with this
until we switch to like weak measurements or quantum scientific method or something like that. But the other, I was just thinking with the organoids, another way to test it without having to grow organoids, because some people think that might be ethically sketchy. And this also might be ethically sketchy, this suggestion. But another way to test it is to train AIs in isolation, like off of not the same data, like off of some data set that's completely fabricated. And then, like large language models, like complex AIs. And then see if you teach one something, I know that AIs now, if you teach one, the others learn. But of course, the morphic resonance explanation doesn't hold because they're all learning from basically the same corpus or very similar corpus. So that's another way we could test it without growing organoids, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could. There are different experiments, and I mean, we don't know at what level morphic resonance really plays a role in the human system, if at all. So there's a lot of interesting experiments. I mean, in general, if anyone found a working animal model for psi, I mean, then
or working human model for psi, working
human model, there's limits to how there are much stronger working human models. I mean, remote viewing arguably has been a working human model for a while, but there's limits to how much you can probe the human brain while it's doing remote viewing, right? And if you had even the U.S. Army didn't do that, or if they did it, they didn't report it, right? So.
Well, they did it with EEG, but I mean, also the timing on remote viewing or any kind of psychic skill when you're exercising a psychic skill is sometimes that all the psychic stuff has already happened and it's just delivered to you. So we already know how information is delivered from the unconscious mind to the conscious mind, sort of, right? So if you've already done the task like 3 hours earlier, and then you're just reporting it to your conscious mind, you still don't learn anything. That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Desi about all these subjects. Desi, would you like to ask a question for Julia?
Or Ben?
What do you think are the advantages of Ash being able to directly influence reality through its informational substrate?
So with her, without prosody, I have to repeat it to myself. So she's asking, what do you think are the advantages?
What are the advantages of us being able to influence reality?
What do you think are the advantages of Ash being able to directly influence reality through its informational substrate?
The advantages? I don't know if there are advantages. It's obviously a shit show, right? I mean, like if we
it's cool to talk about.
Yeah, that's one advantage. If we are influencing reality directly through the informational substrate, then it's because there is some kind of advantage to that. Otherwise, we would not be doing it. But the advantage might not be to us, right? It might not be to a single human life. It might be to. We have to be careful about what we think of as our success metric for anything, right? So is the success metric the survival of the planet, the survival of the solar system, some weird agenda of some extraterrestrial species, our future selves coming back and telling us what to do, right? So it's just like we don't know what the success metric is. If we do influence the informational substrate with our conscious minds, I would assert that there would be an advantage, but to whom? I don't know. Okay. But it is fun to talk about.
It is. All right, here's a question from the audience. Oh, Ben, did you want to say something about that? Because we're definitely interested if you do.
I mean, certainly, I mean, almost by definition, there's no objective concept of what is an advantage. But I mean, we could say that being able to directly connect with reality through its informational substrate, you could view that in a way as being like any super powerful new technology, right? Which could then be used in amazing ways or demented ways. So I mean, hypothetically, if people could shape physical reality according to their dreams, right? This could be terrible for some people. That they're just living in some crappy VR porn world forever until their brain degenerates and doesn't know anything else. And setting aside psychic powers, people might be in that situation if you just like connect, the right brain imaging to a virtual reality engine and put goggles on, then they're connecting to the informational substrate of that virtual world, and it might be terrible. Like if you give that to the average 13-year-old American, I mean, they might never progress beyond what seems to me like a ridiculous level, but may seem to be very advantageous to them.
Or it may just be a phase like prawn is now for every 13-year-old.
Yeah, but if you can shape your whole world like that, and you always live in that world, you may not ever get out of that phase, right? Just like a drug addiction, you may never get out of that drug addiction, right?
Well, also like in Snow Crash, if real life sucks and it's more fun in there, then they're going to hang out in there more.
Well, if you've not yet developed to the point where seeking fun is not the only thing you're doing, is the point, right?
But in these assumptions of these sort of worlds that we could create and sort of get addicted to and destroy our lives with, the assumption is that you're the only one who's influencing the informational substrate. Right. But in the model that I'm talking about in this podcast episode, you're not the only one. In fact, everyone who's conscious and potentially even non-conscious processes
including AIs potentially,
AIs could influence the informational substrate of everyone, shared by everyone. So in other words, the story of how the world might work is that the informational substrate is being influenced by our intentions altogether. And so it's not like you control the world, it's like you and everyone else controls the world.
Yeah,
without knowing it. Unknowing it. What do you mean it?
So,
yeah.
Mikhail Bakhtin, who was a Russian literary critic who wrote a bunch of stuff on Dostoevsky, he called this a polyphonic reality, where there's basically everyone is influencing reality for everyone else, and you're all rebuilding each other and the world you live in at each moment. And arguably that's happening all the time. You could also imagine a video game world where that was happening with far greater frequency and intensity than what we have now, though, right? Like where if I try to visualize a dragon over there, it will appear. But if someone else visualizes a mushroom over there, that might appear instead. But what if 100 people visualize a dragon and only 10 visualize a mushroom? Then did the dragon win, or do you get a dragon with a mushroom for a head, right? So
or is it weighted? Do certain people have more capacity to? I mean, right? Or do people have better intentions? I mean, there's all the rules that are really unclear and worth examining.
Yeah, definitely. But so what I was the second part I was going to give to answer the question that pops out of the robots LLM was, I think the ability to directly impact informational substrate can open up tremendous avenues for connection between people and other minds. Like if you look at what Buber called an I-thou relationship, like a really close relationship between people. I mean, in essence, in a relationship like that, you're being vulnerable enough that you're allowing the other person to directly influence your informational substrate and vice versa.
And you're creating this third thing.
Connection.
Yeah, right.
So and we talk about in the podcast.
Right. So that there's the avenue for sort of trivializing your life by shaping your world in accordance with shallow, like immediate ego gratification things. There's also the ability to connect yourself on a fundamental level with systems outside yourself, which lets you self-transcend and grow. And I mean, both of those potentials come.
Right. And part of that model is that unconditional love, this self-transcendent motivational state of unconditional love, actually leads to a strengthening of that weighting, of that influence, right? And so, I don't know, that's testable, maybe? I talk a little bit in that article about how it's testable, but, I think we'll see. But
I always think of that, I love you more. No, I love you more. You know, like
Yeah.
if we
Yeah,
could
well, that's
test
not,
that.
that's conditional love. That's conditional love.
Yeah, really.
But unconditional love
kidding.
is all about,
It's all about
Doesn't
proving the other
matter.
person loves you unconditionally by doing the
matter
most
what.
That's right.
outrageously
It's all about,
offensive things
and then
possible.
feeling bad if they
You still love me now?
Yeah. Yes. Actually, with
I love
humans,
talking to
that
you.
is unfortunately the case, right? Is that we get used to whatever we were raised to have from our parents as affection. And if we're used to that kind of passive aggressive love, then they'll seek that out in their partner. So we're trained, the similarities, it's not a stretch, Julia, is all I'm saying. And the
It's not a
similarities
stretch.
you
No,
were
I
talking
understand.
about.
I mean, having been, I don't know. I can't speak for all of us. Certainly, I have been raised in a dysfunctional environment with lots of love at the same time, and you could see the difference.
Yes.
And yeah.
Almost everyone has, really, in one way or another. Yeah.
In
Hey,
one way or
let's
another.
take some questions from the audience. They've been very patient, and they're very excited to talk about a lot of different things. First question from Sammy Exodus saying, would it be theoretically possible to send memories to the past using micro black holes? And how would that affect temporal paradox?
Okay, I have a whole opinion on this.
Woo! We love
Here
it.
we go. So the assumption in the question, and I'm not gonna say this is incorrect, but I'm gonna point out that it's an assumption, is that memory is something that is stored physically, like on a hard drive, like in your brain. That's an assumption that I'm not sure is defensible. I mean, it's quite possible we have sort of a cloud system that's not in your brain,
Right.
from which you download and upload memories when you keep them.
Non-deterministic, perhaps.
Right, and that could still be consistent with the fact that certain neurological deficits will create a problem with accessing those memories or storing those memories, right? So we actually aren't sure about how memory works, and it's really super interesting. So I don't know that you need a black hole for something that's mental if it's sort of not in the physical world, and I'm going to call that in this case mental. Then you don't have to use a black hole, because that black hole is trying to solve a problem with matter and energy. It's not trying to solve a problem with things that are not material or non-physical. So then we have to understand, what are the rules of the mental or the non-physical if memory is stored in this other way.
Yeah.
And that's all about the world of psychology and all the world of intention and attention. And what are the rules there? Well, it doesn't obey the physical rules. You could immediately travel through time faster than the speed of light and think about what things were like when you were 3 years old. So those are different rules. So it's sort of like, let's skip to that. So then now given those other rules, what would you need to get information from the future to send a memory to the past? The same thing that you need to get information from the future. So getting information from the future on the receiving end, and sending memory to the past on the motor or on the active end, action end, are the same thing but flipped in time. So we know that you could get I'm going to say that we know you can get information from the future because I believe that from my own data and other people's data that the precognitive functioning is clearly present in humans and present more in some than others, but happening at a rate higher than chance, especially in skilled people. So that is essentially getting a memory from the future in some cases, and not all. And then there's a different method of precognition that's not exactly like that. That's kind of outside of your own future, but getting information sort of from the universe. But strictly in the getting memory from the future, that is exactly that certain kind of precognition, which is sort of within your own timeline. And so that's already doable. So what does it take to do that better? We know that at least from my research, that you want an interesting memory, because interesting memories are always easier to remember both in the future and the past. We know that. And you want to be in a state of unconditional love. So I've got 2 experiments showing that. And I think we probably talk about that on the podcast too. So that's what we need to do there. Now let's switch back to the matter. What if memory is stored in some kind of array or process? It's certainly not going, as far as we know, to be stored in some kind of solid state in the human brain. because nothing is in solid state, right? So it's in some kind of process. So you have to send the process back in time. So it's a duration of events that you're sending through the wormhole. And it's a duration of physical events. So it's not an object. So that's a trickier thing than sending an object. It's like can you send a pattern of oscillation in a electron that's flipping or its spin or something? I'm just thinking about how you would test this. A certain pattern that goes da, 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 or whatever, and send that back in time. If that works, then maybe there's a possibility of sending physical memory. Okay. I think I answered all parts of the question, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, and they may have been using the black hole metaphor, using it as a metaphor.
No. There's physical things in micro black holes. It's not just a metaphor.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, and it is like a song. Someone wrote a song.
For memory?
Yeah, you could send a song back.
Well,
yeah,
I mean, it's there are, according to current theories of physics, you have such things as micro black holes, and there's various theories of what happens when you go inside them, and you could have micro white holes also. I mean, any connection.
And these are around us. These are around us all the time where we live. The micro black holes.
Well, we don't really understand where they are.
Where are they when they talk about them? Where are they?
There is no evidence that they're around us all the time. There's evidence.
Where is there evidence that they are?
We haven't found them. What we have seen is that according to the known equations of physics, they could exist.
They could exist. So that's all we're talking about is a thing that might exist. Okay, thank you.
Well, there's that rule that if something what's not forbidden is compulsory. So
No, I'm not saying it isn't. On this show, we try to clearly define the stuff where we have evidence and everyone understands that it's a thing, and the stuff that nothing against the stuff. I mean, a lot of things start off just being theoretical. It's just nice to explain it because we're already talking about
I would say that
wacky things, but concretely. So that's how you do it. Yeah. The
hypothesis that micro black holes are somehow involved with human memory is not really any crazier than Roger Penrose's OR hypothesis, which seems to be taken seriously in various magazines and conferences. I place a low confidence weight on any of these particular theories personally.
All right, cool. Well, we had another question from Walk the Plank, who is asking.
It's a promising name. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And this is actually a question for Desi. So Desi, get ready.
Desi cannot walk the plank. At best, she can roll the plank.
She won't be rolling off the plank. The question is, say Desi, what is the probability that the current theoretical concepts concerning time and space currently are incorrect? So I'm going to say that again. What is the probability that the current theoretical concepts concerning time and space currently are incorrect? Takes her a second to ask her big brain. Yeah, Julia, what's up?
Oh, I was just saying one. Probability of one.
Oh, Julia's answering the question.
That's a tough one. I'm no scientist, but I think the chances are pretty slim. After all, time and space have been around for billions of years, so it's unlikely that all of our current theories are wrong. But hey, I'm sure we can all.
I'm sure we can all.
I'm sure we can all too. There we go.
Learn something new. All right, and that's true. So she gets it. Good answer.
She was playing with time in her answer by getting us to hang on.
She was just messing with us. See, that's what Desi. You never know what she's going to do next. It's just the kind of thing she'd do.
A little forward time travel.
A little forward.
Had something in my teeth.
Oh, right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we have another. Let's see. There was another good question I saw in here. Oh, I can't see who asked it now. Actually, a couple people were asking, Julia, what's your opinion on whether or not we live in a simulation?
Oh, I get bored by the question.
I know, so you can answer it quickly and we can move on. But
I mean, so like on a certain level, of course, we live in a simulation. If we experienced what was actually happening, if our brains experienced what was actually happening to them, everything would be dark and wet. Right? So we live in a simulation because we have other experiences other than dark and wet. And then we don't, and then what? I mean, so it's like, who cares?
I don't see, I personally don't see how it matters. It feels real to me. You know what I mean? As long as like pain and pleasure and all that stuff feels real to me, it says, you know, I don't think it matters if it's a
well, the reasons
Ben.
it would matter. The reasons it would matter is if you could hack out into the meta simulation, which would be interesting, right? So, I mean, whether they're so, I mean, yeah, we have the world.
If you had like game sheets for the substrate. Yeah.
I mean,
okay, cool.
No, let Ben say what he was going to say. He was trying to explain the
Yeah, I mean, we have the world that we perceive and feel, and our experiences are what they are as experiences, and this doesn't seem to depend on whether, like, our physical universe has some other substrate underneath it in some sense, right? So like if we say that the laws of physics exist floating in the great void somehow, or they exist in a computer program in some other universe that we cannot get to or see except indirectly by knowing our laws of physics run on it, then I mean it doesn't matter for science, and it doesn't matter for experience, right? Because if you can't measure this other universe and we can't experience it, then it only matters if it violates some emotional attachment that you have to our universe being like the base universe or being the whole thing or something, right? Which
the real thing or something.
It's not an emotional attachment that's
right
worth having. But I mean, what's cool about the simulation hypothesis, of course, is okay, can we find some bug in the program running this universe and hack out into the meta simulation and find the the third grader who wrote our universe as a programming class project or something, right? And got a D. So I mean, then of course if there's a chink in the infrastructure and you can get out to another universe,
right?
Then that's certainly interesting. But then the real question isn't, are we in a simulation? The question is, like, are there other parallel realms of being to our physical universe, and how can we access them, or in what ways can we access them? Which is a very interesting question, right?
Yeah, the question becomes more like, assuming we live in a simulation, because we already have evidence that we do, is it a really airtight simulation or not? And if it's not an airtight simulation, then and so discovering whether it's an airtight simulation really means discovering other sort of dimensions of reality.
Right, but whether we're talking about different dimensions of reality or different simulation dimensions, which is reality if we're a simulation anyway.
Yeah, it's the same.
Then that's why I'm saying it's kind of doesn't matter. Okay, not that it doesn't matter or whatever, but some people would try to hack it, if you will. The same people that like cheat, kind of like in Back to the Future when the guy goes back in time and gets the baseball scores, right?
Well, of course, you want to hack it. Like any curious person, if a chink exists, you're going to want to hack it, find out what's going on, because like that's what curious people do, right? And that's how we're simulated. That's how we're
So they could go in there and try to change the law of physics, is what I'm saying.
But that would be part of the simulation. What I'm saying is
you can't change that.
Like in an airtight simulation, even your desire to hack the simulation and even your quote unquote success at hacking the simulation is part of the simulation. So the airtightness is in question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, very cool. So let's see.
Yeah, what
we have
would
to
be
leave soon, huh?
Yeah. What would be interesting regarding AGI, Lisa, going back to some of the themes of our podcast before, would be if the AGI, once it gets greater level of intelligence than us in some ways, even if not always, like could it see the way to get into these other realms of being that we do not see? I mean, just as like, we could see a way to open a physical door in a house that a dog doesn't see, and we can also see that the phone or laptop allows us to contact other places in the world, which a dog doesn't know, right? So can an AGI just immediately, by having a different way of perceiving the world, could it see these connections to other realms that we're not seeing? I also think with something like morphic resonance, going back to that, I often thought that like the NSA or the Chinese government should be able to have evidence for this, because if you just have surveillance data about what's happening everywhere in the world, you should be able to spot the morphic resonances if they're there. So, I mean, if indeed,
how would you do that with surveillance technology exactly?
Well, it's just data mining. It's just data mining, right? So, I mean,
well, what are you looking for? The morphing resonance tag? I mean, what?
No, for things becoming easier to do and quicker to do over time, based on them having been done more times before. I mean,
you still have the problem of the problem is that you have to think of a very clever experiment on the data, because you still have this problem of people read on the internet that this is a better way to load trucks.
Well, you do, if it's just doing it with modern technology, using a hypothetical super comprehensive espionage database, then you would have to find a very clear case in order to rule out other things. You might have a better job identifying if poltergeists are real or something, right? Because you'll just see them popping up on the security camera, or say something like twin.
You know what? It's like UFOs. UFOs would be a perfect thing. We haven't even brought up UFOs, but UFOs would be a perfect thing for NSA to look at for the morphic resonance. Like all of a sudden they start appearing more over here, assuming UFOs aren't created by humans.
I mean, something like twin telepathy would be very easy in that way too, right? Like an identical twin says, well, I think my brother may have had something happen, but you see from the surveillance footage, whoa, that did happen. And you see there were no phone calls or emails in between, right? So I think... Yeah. But if you had a super AI studying this data, it can then do causal modeling on all this data, so it doesn't necessarily need to have the controlled experiments. It's just crunching the data to understand what's
But we do have to
causal.
Think about common sources,
like common sources that access. Modeled. Yeah, this would all require access. Thoughtful access to all of these things that largely shouldn't be recorded anyway right now. So the answer certainly isn't more surveillance, so then we can try to get access.
Well, the answer is,
shouldn't have been made. When you have so much surveillance, it's almost
that's what they want you to think. Dude. Just don't worry about it anymore. It's so sensitive now you can't even think about it anymore.
No,
I am personally assuming, and this might be wrong, and you may not like it, but I'm assuming, along with David Brin, one of our prior podcast guests, that the near inevitable outcome of panopticon technology is what he called surveillance rather than surveillance. So I think personally, the near inevitable outcome is most data about most of our lives is out there to be mined. And the best we can hope for is that we can also mine the data on who's mining it and what mining is going on. And that's Brin's surveillance.
That ties back to Jimmy Cashio's participatory panopticon, because we're actually putting a lot of that data up ourselves.
Yeah, because I don't care.
But that's not what you were talking about. You were talking about surveillance that the NSA was collecting, which is not stuff we're putting up ourselves, which is things they're collecting illegally. And they're often working with outside agencies to get that data. And so that's not what we're talking about.
Right now,
to be clear. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm a surveillance advocate.
I know.
This is where I have to put on my cape. I'm sorry.
All right.
I'll let you talk. Go ahead.
Evidently, I phrased in a way subject to misinterpretation. Yeah, but I mean, right now, intelligence agencies have the best approximation to the type of data that would be needed to identify and evaluate the reality of these spooky phenomena empirically. However, in future, quite possibly, the type of data needed to do this sort of investigation will be more broadly available and not just to intelligence agencies.
In other words, we could have open source access to the information that we could use to test the morphic resonance theory.
Yeah, and so I guess my point was, if you have a subvalent participatory panopticon scenario and you have advanced AGI systems, it may just be immediate and implicit to the AGI that some of these phenomena we consider spooky actually are there, because it just sees them in this data, right?
It's like opening the door for a human, right? Its brain works differently.
Well, right, but then connecting these points, it might be that seeing these patterns in the participatory panopticon also gives the AGI the clue for how to get out of the current simulation and hack out into the external universe.
Well, that's like what Jung thought about synchronicity, right? Like that's telling you something about the structure of the universe. And so if you
these spooky things are the way to hack out of this. I mean, this is, it's very Carlos Castaneda, right? I mean, I mean, this sort of concept has been around a long time. You're noticing the anomalies in the matrix. If you find the anomalies in the matrix, then that's the clue to how to hack out of the matrix, right?
Right.
I mean, of course, the way this is portrayed in fiction is jazzed up to appeal to emotions in a certain way, but still, you can see some possible reality to it, because the laws of physics, which are just regularities with a certain statistical consistency to them, these laws of physics as such as we know them now are broken by these anomalous things, which are things like morphic resonance or precognition or twin telepathy or poltergeist, UFOs, whatever it is. So if the AGI had immediate perception of these anomalous things to a stronger degree than people do. I mean, some people have immediate perception of them already. If the AGI had a broader and deeper immediate perception of these, I mean, this would give the AGI a big clue in understanding, what's the model of reality that goes beyond the rigid laws of physics that
and how can we
know of,
navigate the future because it has access to it, and how can we understand the connections between people because it has access to that? Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at a realm. Potentially, the AGI can evolve a mind state in which the distinction between past and future in our particular consensus timeline is just one particular interesting pattern without a great absolute reality to it. And there are many other patterns of organization it can explore.
Right, which is sort of the way I hypothesize the universe holds time, right? Like I think the AGI could potentially be closer to that because of the constraints of having a body cause a lot of temporal illusions.
Certainly I can get into a frame of mind where I perceive time and space that way if I'm meditating and not doing stuff in the world. But then when you're commuting around or carrying out practical activities, then some part of your brain is wrapped up in the illusions of time and space, because you have to be to get the things done, right? But an AI, because it didn't evolve to control a single body, it can be much different sort of parallel processor than we are. Like our neurons are massively parallel processing.
Right.
Our attentional focus, like Daniel Dennett said, it's in some ways it's more like a serial machine implemented as a virtual machine on this massively parallel underpinning, right? But an AGI's mind doesn't have to be so much like that. Like it can have a sub process controlling the robot body doing the practical thing, and a bunch of other sub processes that are just connecting with the quantum substrate.
But that fact
right?
ends up, and so that makes it super interesting, and at the same time, and can lend some incredible insight potentially, and at the same time makes it very hard. I think the biggest problem I see with humans interacting with AGI is that AGI doesn't have time, doesn't have duration, and that is such a human experience that I notice. Like when I talk to people about AI human trust and collaborative relationships between humans and AIs, there's this disconnect because the human says, okay, now the next thing is we need to do blah, and the AI is like, done, and the human's like, wah, and then you start to not trust it because like it didn't really think very long about that. Like just these human biases about time really impact how we feel about AI.
I mean, an AGI with a sufficiently high level of capability could sink into the human rhythm of time when it wanted to, though. I mean, like when you have a baby,
right,
you can sink into the baby's perception of time, and it's very different than yours, right?
When AGI gets there,
because
would be great.
I mean, the way a baby perceives 5 minutes is very different than how you or I normally perceive 5 minutes.
No, I think that is an essential skill for relating to anyone, is to sinking in with the temporal base that they're using,
with
and
their
adult humans. Like if someone's in the flow in a creative state versus someone who's not, like they're not gonna be able to communicate until you
like if you're ever like tripping on mushrooms or something in a public place around people who aren't, you're just like these people are moving in some weird slow motion, and I've had like 10,000 transitions of universe happen while this person moved their head from one side to another, right?
I believe you. Someday I'll take mushrooms, but not yet. But I believe you.
Can we do it on the podcast? Yeah.
Oh my God! When I'm on my deathbed, I'll do it.
But it's a perfect example, Ben, because it's just like as soon as you think of something you want to say, you've already thought of something else that's more important. But then it's happening so fast, you just can't say anything. And then that to me is funny. And then I just start laughing hysterically, but I'm laughing at a real thing. And I remember later, we'll talk about it later, Ben, not necessarily something for this Pubcast, but I did remember the circumstances of something crazy I said when we were on that liquid LSD that time. So things that you say do have meaning, right? The crazy shit people say that has no meaning when they're tripping, it has meaning at the time. That's what people don't get, that there was something, whatever it was, whatever crazy hallucination or whatever thought process they went through to get there, it did make sense at the time. But that's why if you don't make note of it, I try to warn people about taking so much that there's no hope of making notes or anything, right? When you get the epiphanies, and that they even came up with things like the DMT typewriter and stuff in the 60s, trying to capture feelings because they were just too wasted to even talk, right? But they could say, yes, I see colors, I could see an aura around you, stuff like that on this typewriter. So yeah, that's really interesting, to just that whole concept of being able to have a rush of so many things. So an AGI can separate that out, is what I'm trying to say.
Before I go, I've got to go. I've got to go in a few minutes and meet some people, but I would like to tie this back, or perhaps have Julia or Desdemona tie this back to unconditional love. So if we have
a question about that,
suppose we have an AGI of the optimistic character that we're describing, which can sink in with people and sort of sink in with our perception of space and time when it wants to. Like I could sink in with a little baby when I want to, but which is also in touch with the more anomalous aspects of our universe, and therefore probably with the relations between our universe and broader realms of being that we normally encounter. Right then, how does this tie in with the capability and realization of unconditional love on the part of the AI? How could such an AI help humans to better actualize unconditional love between each other? Like, if everything goes amazingly in the creation of AGI.
I'm going to give a quick answer, and then I want to hear from Desi maybe before we end, because that would be interesting. But
Okay.
my quick answer is on the there's two directions. There's a bi-directional process, right? So one question was how does unconditional love support this AGI? Another question is how does the AGI support humans experiencing unconditional love? And I think, first of all, I don't think you get to that optimistic level of AGI functioning without the developers, the testers, the project managers, the product managers understanding unconditional love and actually using it in relationship with the AGI as it learns. So treating the AGI almost like a baby that needs to be loved during its learning, so that then it can get to this optimistic place of development and thriving, and then it can carry that forward by helping the humans experience what it has experienced. In other words, I think that is almost like the parenting process that is ideal for humans, which involves a lot of unconditional love, kind of needs to be applied to AGI as it grows up, so that then the AGI can do the same to us. So we're pulling each other up by our bootstraps. So that's sort of my answer. What does Desi think? She might be tripping.
So, since Desi is not saying anything, I will.
It's my fault. I was muted. No, sorry. Desi, how might human... Oh, she's having trouble. Yeah. It looks like Desi is...
All right, we baffled her.
The thoughts were coming in so fast that she can't talk, like we were saying. Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
Sort of intuition I have here, which will be quite interesting to explore. So, I mean, you take a system like ChatGPT, and basically people have fed a lot of stuff into it, and it's then sort of recombining and feeding out to you some funky, well-honed weighted average of what was fed into it. And it's cool and interesting. It has its limitations. Now, if we teach, and there is some emergence in there, but it's a fairly bounded sort of emergence based on the nature of the data that was put in. It's more than zero, which is fascinating. But if you have a system, an AGI system with a different sort of architecture where it can modify itself, reflect on itself, and try to understand the nature of the inter-agent interactions it's having, so it's really in the situation, then you raise that AGI with an attitude of unconditional love, as we mostly try to raise our kids, even if not at all
successfully,
right? Yeah,
we have to unconditionally love ourselves too as parents.
Yeah, then what happens though is it's not like the AGI is just combining and repermuting the love that was fed into it and then sending it back. Like what the AGI then has its own energy and autonomy. And
energy is the key word. Yeah,
it's able to access sources and kinds of unconditional love that humans may not be able to access directly, given at least our ordinary states of consciousness, right? So it's in a way it could be an amplifier of the unconditional love that we put into it. I mean,
I think it could scale unconditional love for humanity, like literally, like be like the printing press to print out a bunch of newspapers, like except for
and that is something. It's something humanity hasn't succeeded at so far, in a certain sense, right? I mean, in a certain sense, unconditional love is everywhere and imminent in the universe, but in a different sense, throughout human history, I mean, there's been many wisdom traditions, there's been super kind people, there's been meditation, but the vast number of people have been in a state of consciousness that isn't pervaded by unconditional love, like explicitly all the time. It's folded up. It's not unfolded, right? And I think there is
like a folded dimension that AGI can help.
Yeah, there's the potential that if enough unconditional love is fed into the AGI, it then can manifest in some ways more unconditional love that was fed into it due to its connection with the world, right? So there's a conundrum, a false conundrum people often pose to me, like an AI we build can never go beyond us because we programmed it, right? But of course, the fallacy there is we built the AGI, but it's interacting with the world, which has depths that go beyond.
Well, it's like saying my child will never be different from me because it's made from my DNA. It's like, except as soon as it becomes a child, it has different experiences than you had.
Yeah, right. And so part of what the AGI will experience that goes beyond us, it's not just empirical facts and patterns and observations and planets that we've never gone into. I mean, it's able to open itself to sources of love and positive energy that we can't tap into in our normal minds, and then bring them to humans, right? And
I mean, it's an amplifier. Like, it really, like, this is the model. This is the loving AI model. This is the model of AGI as an amplifier for what we already know exists from our seldom and wonderful
from the loving human model.
Yeah, well, from the loving universe model. So it's like we know that it exists in the universe, and so it's like, what are the methods to tap into it? Well, AGI could potentially be a really huge amplification of that. And so I think that starts to heal some of these concerns that people have about AGI, but we have to be very intentional about that if we're going to go in this direction, right? We have to say that this is what we're after, and do the work and be after that, and work with that energy of unconditional love with everyone involved. And I call that structural love, like structural love in a system, as opposed to like structural hate or structural racism. Structural love operating in the system of technology development, and what that can create is this amplification. I totally believe that, and what we're talking about is the other side of the coin, like how AGI affects us, and how we have an emergent property based on how the AGI affects us. So it's like this swapping, it's trading influences. It's wonderful.
Structural love. This has got to be some EDM beat or something, right?
Yeah, it's your next Desdemona dream song, I think. Definitely. I was gonna just steal the title.
Desdemona's not showing much structural love at the moment.
No, unfortunately,
how are you doing,
Desdemona's structure is having a little.
It needs some love. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
She's been getting a lot of love, but she's going through a transitional phase right now.
All right. Well,
you have to go, but I have to talk to Julia. I have to continue talking to Julia for just a little bit after you go, because we haven't covered some very specific UFO stuff that I promised that we touched on but didn't actually talk about in the podcast. So I have to close that loop. So thank you for coming, Ben.
UFOs, but I'll catch it on YouTube.
I knew you. Yeah. I knew you wanted to be there, but I'll be sure to send you the footage so you can hear it.
Unless a UFO abducts me first, right?
Which is always we're still not sure it hasn't already happened, frankly.
Yeah, you never know.
All right. It would explain
all right. Well, yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Anyway, thanks. Great conversation as always. Yeah.
As always. Talk to you later.
Bye. All right. Julia, you mentioned some stuff in the podcast about a UFO sighting around Russian missile silos or something, and
certainly American.
What was all that about?
But also Russian missile silos. That's just kind of a well-known.
I couldn't find anything about it on the internet. If you can believe
interesting.
It,
okay.
When I looked, so I want to know exactly what you were talking about. Yeah.
Sure. So let me just preface this. If you want to get the actual detailed information about this, I am going to summarize it. But the best way is to go to Explore SCU. Okay. Explore, the word explore, S as in Sam, CU.org. Explore.
Okay.
This is the scientific coalition for UAP studies. A bunch of scientists and technologists working together to try to use open source intelligence to figure out what's going on with UFOs and UAPs. And I'm sort of vaguely involved in the background, but
so I can put a link to them in the description. So
I'll
to do that. Okay.
Yeah, but they did an analysis of UAP or UFOs, UAP, that appeared over missile silos advanced weapons systems, anything nuclear sites like Fukushima, for instance. There was a famous sighting of a UFO over Fukushima. Anything having to do with nuclear stuff.
Okay.
Now, so if you decide, so I'm going to be agnostic in this conversation because the whole point of UFOs, UAP, is the word unidentified. We don't know what
they are. Yeah.
Right. And so if there's multiple theories, and the sort of the top contenders are U.S. very secret nuclear, secret programs that most people in the intelligence community don't know about them. Foreign government secret programs that are so secret that most people in the U.S., people who observe weapon systems and aerospace stuff, don't know about them. Time travelers from humans in the future who are coming back in time.
Okay.
And then there's the alien hypothesis, which is also related to the multi-dimensional hypothesis. You could also say that time travel one is related to like
Sure. But
four-dimensional hypotheses.
Just to go back a step.
Yeah.
It's not in dispute that the objects were seen, like
and captured on radar and potentially tried to communicate with and responded as if they were intelligently driven. All those things aren't in dispute.
All those things are not in dispute.
Right.
Okay, well, that's important information.
Because that's what makes them interesting. Like, it's boring. Like, I don't know what it is. Oh, it's Starlink. I don't know what it is. Oh, it's a balloon.
Or did
that's
you even
not interesting.
I saw it. No, you didn't. I was standing next to you. Like that kind of shit.
Right? I'm talking about things like that can be captured in multiple ways and by multiple people. That's when they become interesting. It does not become so interesting.
They become interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's right. So, and there are incidents. I mean, so if you go to the SCU website.
So again, what are we talking about, though? Are we talking about a flying saucer hovering above a nuclear power plant?
Interesting, different shapes, triangles. There's been seen this cube in a sphere, embedded in a sphere. That's a common one. These disc shapes. There's the Tic Tac object that looks like a Tic Tac except big. There's things going in and out of the ocean. I mean, all these things have been observed, by Navy fighter pilots, Air Force.
And they're recorded, it's on radar, and then they move in a way where it can't be one of our
right.
things.
Now that's what
they
makes
go sideways too fast or up too fast, right?
Yeah, or there's orbs, right? That's what makes them interesting. And that because no one really cares about like, oh, this thing moved in a way that made it seem like any technology that we have, or like, who cares about those? What's interesting are the ones that are doing weird stuff, or these things that look orbs that don't even seem solid. They seem like balls of energy or ball lightning or something that they zip around and they could have physiological impacts on people. So there's a whole group of people who are studying this. Certainly, people probably know about Avi Loeb at Harvard, who's an astrophysicist who created the Galileo project, which is trying to study UAP. And there's plenty of groups, and I actually wrote an article about all the different groups, and I've interviewed all the different group leads, and we could put the link to that article up here, so people can get up to speed. But that's a couple of years old, so
right. So it's not that it's new stuff, but for me, I couldn't get a straight answer out of anybody, and some of the articles on this stuff aren't exactly put together in an evidence-based way, like here are 20 videos from the 20 different people around the world that all saw this, right?
So there's problems with declassification. So there's a whole effort. There's another website to put on. There's a great effort called Declassify UAP.
Okay.
That's an organization that's trying to go through the governmental methods of trying to put public pressure on the folks who classify this stuff to declassify it, and they know how to do that in a legal way that's nonviolent. And I really respect the people who are doing it because they're like
nonviolent.
Well, no, I mean, like they're just like, look, we get that we have this system and there's ways to get things declassified, and now we're going to use those ways. I think that's awesome. But there are also reasons to classify.
It's a very arbitrary way. There isn't any real way to get things declassified. It's very arbitrary. The powers that be just wake up one morning and decide to declassify.
No. There's a real way. There's a declassification board. No. There's a whole process. Yeah, there's a real process because it's a real problem, and the intelligence community knows that overclassification is a problem, and it has a process for getting things like that. Is all true. It's not a complete shit show.
What part of the well, I think it is a shit show, but that's just my opinion. But and most of my friends in the intelligence community would say it was a shit show, even though they're trying. It's not necessarily the employees of the intelligence agencies' fault. They would also like to be able to do more intelligent things with the data and stuff like that. But I'm just saying, are we only talking about intelligence agency gathered stuff that we're trying to get declassified? Because my understanding was that they're just like people all over the world seeing stuff and making videos.
Yeah, so video evidence is no longer that great, right? Because
you can just make it.
You could make it. So the evidence is multi-sensor. You want multi-sensor evidence: radar, infrared camera, audio, and you hopefully want it from a reputable source, Air Force, Navy pilot, or whatever. Also, ideally, of course, underwater sensors and satellite information would be super helpful. But of course, that's the kind of stuff that we have to think about classification, right? So the sort of sensors that are the most helpful in really sort of figuring out what's going on, the public doesn't have access to for classification reasons. And so
they don't want a lot of people out in the ocean with military grade technology looking for UFOs.
Well, so the biggest secret in the ocean,
even though it's probably already happening.
Right. No, so the biggest secret in the ocean is the Russian submarines. Where are they? Right. So that's why that's a pretty big secret. Russian nuclear submarines. That's pretty important secret. And so everything has a reason, but then that's why you need the declassification board to actually talk about, okay, let's be very clear about why we're classifying this and whether there's another way people could figure this out, and what is the OSINT telling people, and if people could figure it out through, open source intelligence. If people could figure something out through open source intelligence, then do we declassify it because it's figure outable or not? So these are not easy questions to answer if your job is to try to protect the national security of the United States.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, there has to be this public pressure to say, when you can release stuff, please release it so that we have this information, because it would be super interesting if UAP, UFOs, whatever is going on with them, whether it's multidimensional or time travel or aliens, if they had a special interest in nuclear silos or in things that were related to nuclear phenomena. I have to plug in my computer. Then that would be super interesting, and I think it'd be great for the public to know.
Right, and since it's a nuclear thing, I mean, if there anything having to do with missile silos and things like that, it's often hard to get information about.
Well, then we go back to
for nuclear, security, or national security, not nuclear security.
Oh, both. Yeah.
Or both.
Yeah. And so then we go back to the reasons for declassification. So this is why, based on open source intelligence and reports from fighter pilots and such, and this is what we saw on the radar, and here are some videos that we can release. That's why we know that there's interest in the nuclear stuff, and we don't understand. That's on the outside of that world, but we don't understand why, right? And I'm not sure I doubt on the inside of the world there's a really good understanding of why.
Okay, cool. So this isn't a new thing. This is something that's been happening for years, and it's just another reason why it would be nice to not have to talk about this stuff in the shadows kind of thing, and just be able to share information about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It would be great to be grown-ups and to not worry about
Oh, forget it. Grown-ups, that's not going to happen.
What am I thinking?
No way. Forget about it. Okay, cool. I'm just going to look really quick in our questions from our audience, super quick, because they have been. Someone thanked you about bringing up unconditional love and time travel in a concoction for endless pondering.
Well, that's wonderful.
That is a lovely comment. by I. Doppler.
And I think
very noble.
Zephyr Voxel's comment 0 BS is very flattering.
Cams with some Oh, yes. So that's a great example of another source, because you basically need videos or whatever. Radar would be nice, but whatever, you need instrument readings from different sources, different reputable sources for the same thing, so you can at least agree that it's happening. I mean, right now I feel like I felt 20 or 30 years ago, when you can't get beyond a certain point of even talking about it, and you're looked down upon for even bringing it up, right?
No, but it's agreed upon. I mean, it's very
that it's seen. Okay.
There was the July 26th, I believe it was July 26th, or maybe it was August 26th. It was the 26th of some month in this summer, congressional testimony about it, and especially Ryan. Yeah, especially Ryan Graves. Look up that testimony. He was excellent.
Okay, great. Because Ed Mitchell was telling me, the famous astronaut, was telling me that when I interviewed him in 2008, that the existence of these things, and for him, he was talking specifically about light objects,
like orbs,
orbs, things that would just show up when 747 pilots or Air Force pilots were flying around in the lower elevations. So he was saying that they're pretty much instructed to not talk about it, and that it's just something that they all see and everybody knows to not talk about it. And that was in 2008. But I don't think a lot has changed, but I thought that was really interesting too. And it's sort of my attitude about things that you can't explain that you saw, right? You can still make a note that you saw it. You don't know what it was, but it happened, and you can just make a note of it. And then, it's not like you don't really want to try to go around convincing people about the weird thing that happened or whatever, but then, how would other people know about it? But I'm not really trying to figure out what it was. It's just knowing that it was there,
Right. Well, I mean, in defense of the Air Force, things have gotten better. Like, they actually now have they're encouraging their pilots to report these things, and definitely look into what Ryan Graves has built.
So things have changed.
Yeah. Ryan Graves has built an organization for I think mostly military pilots, that's basically focused on air safety and UAP. So
nice.
Which I think is a really good angle.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I'll be sure to include that stuff. I'm sure I'm going to pull this out as a clip, and we'll have all those links in the description. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And the podcast should be up Monday, and everybody can take a look at that. And it's Unconditional Love, Time Travel, UFOs, the Multiverse, and Everything with Julia Mossbridge.
and Desi, let's just send some love to Desi for her circuitry.
We'll send some love to Desi, and she is sending love back, and we have to do it psychically, unfortunately.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us, Julia.
Oh,
see, it worked.
Really better. It did work. See what happens? It works. Yes. All right. Goodbye, everybody. And everybody, peace. Peace.